In just 3 minutes, an entire Russian supply line went up in flames. Deep inside Russian-controlled territory, a fuel train carrying 840 tons of diesel rolled quietly across the tracks. What happened next wasn't luck. It was a meticulously planned Ukrainian drone strike that took down Russia's million-dollar train. At 3:47 a.m. on June 22, 2025, a Russian locomotive engineer went about his routine inspection, unaware that his train had been the subject of silent observation for more than an hour. Within minutes, what began as another night hauling fuel through occupied territory would turn into a fiery spectacle. This attack was a clear sign that Ukraine was reshaping modern warfare with innovation, improvisation, and intelligence. Ukraine didn't have a chance encounter on the battlefield. Instead, it was a meticulously planned operation near Molokhansk, about 35 kilometers behind the front lines. The fuel train in question carried a massive payload, with 12 fuel cars transporting a combined 840 tons of diesel. It was enough to keep 3 Russian armored battalions operational for about 10 days. But this was an important target for Ukraine as a logistical artery. It was a vital link for the Russian military. In fact, after the attack, the rail line was damaged, and it badly affected the supplies to Russian-occupied territories for a time. For 4 days, Ukrainian defense intelligence tracked this single train. A network of partisan spotters equipped with encrypted smartphones provided updates on its schedule, route, and vulnerability. From departure at the Rostovan fuel depot to its expected transit through a section of track with minimal Russian air defense coverage, every detail was mapped. By the time the train had reached this isolated stretch, Ukrainian forces knew its position to the meter and its timing to the second. The strike was carried out by Kabul 9, an elite Ukrainian special unit that's known for its drone warfare expertise. The Kabul 9 pilots operated from a concealed site 35 kilometers away and monitored their targets through encrypted Starlink connections. They used thermal cameras to see clearly despite attacking at around 3 a.m. in the morning. What has made Ukraine's attacks on Russian infrastructure so interesting, like with the fuel train, is how they don't even use conventional military drones. Working with a budget, Ukraine uses modified consumer-grade DJI Mavics, upgraded far beyond their off-the-shelf capabilities. Ukrainian engineers had reprogrammed the firmware, extending their zoom to 56 times and their flight time to 45 minutes. More impressively, the drones had been fitted with custom radio frequency modules capable of hopping between 1,500 frequencies per second, making them nearly impossible to jam. Attached to each drone was a 2.6 kilogram PG-7 VL-shaped charge, which was originally designed for rocket-propelled grenades. These charges, with their copper-lined cones, could punch through 15 millimeters of steel with ease. It's a terrifying prospect for anything, like this train, carrying liquid fuel. As the first attack drone began its terminal approach, the electronic landscape shifted. Russian operators had detected some activity in the skies. A Lear-3 electronic warfare system, mounted on a truck nearby, roared to life. The Lear-3 was designed for moments like this. It blanketed a 30-kilometer radius in broadband jamming, consisting of a torrent of electronic noise intended to disrupt signals and blind drones mid-flight. When that failed, operators switched tactics, focusing their interference on the common 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz frequencies that most drones use. But the Ukrainians had anticipated this. Their drones' frequency-hopping spread spectrum technology rendered the Russian jamming ineffective. The drones switched frequencies faster than the Lear-3 could track, slipping through the digital noise. When radio interference failed, Russian forces escalated to GPS spoofing, broadcasting false signals to make the drones believe they were thousands of kilometers away. Yet, even this sophisticated attack faltered. Every Ukrainian drone wasn't depending on GPS but on internal gyroscopes and interior measurement units, with tiny sensors that track motion through physics. Another edge that Ukraine had over Russia was the fiber optic cable. Unlike typical drones, which rely on radio control, these first-person view quadcopters were connected to the operators through ultra-thin optical fibers. It is thinner than a human hair, yet it can transmit high-definition video and control signals at gigabit speeds. The glass fibers emitted no electromagnetic signature for Russian sensors to detect. To the enemy, the drones appeared autonomous, operating on pre-programmed routes. But in reality, it was being guided by human pilots with surgical precision. There are some trade-offs to this style. The cables added weight, reducing agility and leaving a visible trail that could compromise the operators. At 3:49 a.m., the first Ukrainian drone struck fuel car number 4. The explosion was immediate and devastating. The shaped charges jet of molten metal pierced the steel wall, igniting 70 tons of diesel in a blast hot enough to vaporize the surrounding air. Within seconds, the smoke from the fuel train could be seen past 20 miles. By the time the second drone approached, 3 cars were already burning. Russian guards startled from their cabins and opened fire with AK-74 rifles. But hitting a small maneuvering drone traveling at 160 kilometers per hour was near impossible. The drone continued to move forward, with the pilot guiding it toward car number 8. One drone's warhead malfunctioned, detonating partially and then leaving the fuel car ruptured but not destroyed. The pilot reacted instantly, steering the burning wreckage into the spilled fuel. It turned the failed strike into a secondary firebomb. Moments later, there was a massive second detonation. The fire became worse with the weather. The rising heat produced violent convection currents, whipping the air into 60 kilometers per hour gusts that battered the incoming drones. Smoke blinded the optical sensors, and the heat disrupted the infrared targeting systems. So, pilots couldn't see a lot beyond the thermal signatures. Despite the chaos, they pressed on. One drone's fiber optic cable snagged on a signal post, reducing its movement to a 30-meter radius. The operator refused to abort. Instead, he guided the drone like a tethered falcon, adjusting for cable drag and crosswind to line up a final shot. At 3:50 a.m., 2 drones struck almost simultaneously, with one hitting car number 8 and the other car number 11. The overlapping shockwaves amplified each other, fusing into a single, sustained explosion that tore the remaining train cars apart. The final drone, which was running on only 8% battery, dove straight for the locomotive. Its warhead punched through the engine block, guaranteeing that even if any part of the train survived, it could never move again. When dawn broke, the Russians were shocked at how much damage had been done. The locomotive and several fuel cars were destroyed, and the railway tracks were warped beyond repair. Ukraine used drones worth about $8,000 to attack Russia, and Russia ended up with $2.4 million in destroyed rolling stock and $600,000 in lost fuel. It was an impressive, cost-efficient attack on the side of Ukraine, but for Russia, a major blow to their massive military. In fact, drones have become one of the sharpest tools in Ukraine's defense and office toolbox. Ukraine realized that it couldn't match Russia tank for tank or missile for missile. Instead, it embraced different ways to exploit Russia's vulnerabilities instead of confronting strength head-on. Drones have many purposes, including reconnaissance, targeting, loitering munitions, and strategic harassment. Because they are smaller, cheaper, and easier to produce than traditional military assets, drones afford flexibility. Ukraine has even cut costs further by modifying civilian drones, which are cheaper than military drones. Recently, Ukraine has used drones to strike important infrastructure and military targets in Russia, especially those that aren't far from the borderlines. In September, Ukrainian long-range drones struck an oil pumping station in Russia's Chuvashia region. The attack caused a fire and halted operations. This kind of strike directly hit the economic machinery that funds war operations. Perhaps one of the most daring recent drone operations was Spiderweb, which involved smuggling in dozens of first-person view drones hidden in wooden containers to strike multiple Russian air bases. The targets reportedly included strategic bombers and other high-value aircraft, all of which are assets worth in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. With a few drones, Ukraine inflicted damage in the billions. Ukraine has carried out multiple drone strikes targeting Russian oil refineries and fuel-related infrastructure. These strikes have knocked out about 10% of Russia's refining capacity. In fact, a Ukrainian drone attack caused a fire at the Lukoil refinery in Kstovo. Many times, Russian airports have been shut down, over 200 occasions in 2025, due to drone threats. These are often precautionary measures, as they halt flights when drones are detected close to the Russian airspace. Over time, Russia's drone-centric strategy has delivered a lot of payoffs. It has caused a lot of economic losses on the oil facilities and military infrastructure. In fact, Russia has lost billions in infrastructure due to Ukraine's drone attacks. Operation Spiderweb is a case in point. Relatively low-cost drones striking high-value assets, leading to damage measured in billions, out of proportion to what was invested. Aside from the pure economic damage, Russia is now redirecting its resources to protect more territory, move air defense systems, and build redundancy into infrastructure. Of course, it's not all smooth. Defensive countermeasures from Russia are improving. Better air defenses, electronic warfare systems, more surveillance, improved radar, and hardened infrastructure. Some drone attacks are intercepted. Not all achieve major destruction. The risk to drone operators and logistical constraints like range, battery life, and weather still matter. Also, some damage is indirect or temporary, meaning a continuous rhythm of attacks is required to sustain pressure. Like we saw when Ukraine made a drone strike on Russia's fuel train, Russia is coming up with different ways to prevent the drone attacks from Ukraine. Russia regularly employs electronic warfare systems to disrupt or disable Ukrainian drones. These systems aim to jam data links, GPS/GLONASS positioning, and other navigational or communication channels. Now that Russia can expect the attacks, more than a third of Ukrainian fixed-wing attack drones have been made ineffective due to Russian EW activity. Russia is now installing nets, or anti-drone metal mesh, around sensitive infrastructure and has placed modified armor, like turtle tanks, on their vehicles to reduce the damage from drone strikes. The operation against the Russian train by Ukraine's drones is another technological milestone. With these drones, warfare is no longer the domain of billion-dollar defense budgets. What do you think about Ukraine's shift to use drones against Russia? And would Russia do the same? Let's know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on global military events.